The US Championship 2025 is in full swing, and what a strong lineup for this 12-player all-play-all. After 6 rounds, 3 players shared the lead. Was this so? Fabiano Caruana and Hans Niemann. So therefore, the round 7 game between Hans Niemann, the bad boy of US chess, against Fabiano Caruana, the good guy of US chess, was going to be of crucial importance. Let's dive straight in. So Niemann, he's approaching the top 10 in the world. You know, he's become much steadier over the past year. Caruana rated number 3 in the world, and of course he's qualified for the candidates. Could this be his time for the World Championship? You never know. It's a gioco piano. Now, instead of knight f6 or bishop c5, Caruana plays d6 after a bit of a think. So that's a little bit unusual. And white can play d4 here, but Niemann, after a 10-minute think, played c3. So looks pretty standard. You want to get in d4. And Caruana lashed out with f5. Well, this is extraordinary. I mean, this looks like something straight out of the 19th century, something from a game by Paul Morphy, or even earlier. You know, it could be like a Philidor. Just let me go back a couple of moves. This is known as the Philidor counter gambit. I mean, it's obviously related to that, but I mean, it's an extraordinary move to play when white's bishop is already on this diagonal, so it's going to be difficult for black's king to castle. It's also similar to the Schliemann as well, or the Jänisch as some people know it. So already, you know, white has a tricky decision here. You know, do you take on f5? D4, I mean, d4 I would like to play just to, you know, break out, but actually that's no good, because then d5 comes. That shows, in fact, in this case, the bishop is not well placed on c4. But Hans replied in a very modest way. He just played d3, holding the position. And if knight f6, then it's possible to play the crude knight g5, just heading for this square. But Caruana followed up with queen f6. And Niemann plays this very coolly. He simply castles. You could wait with the king. It might be more prudent, more, let's say, more practical to wait with the king, play knight d2. Because after castle's kingside, Caruana seized the moment to play f4. Bang! Played very quickly. In fact, I don't think objectively the position is bad for white, but suddenly white is under pressure because black is going to play this really crude attack, this pawn storm with g5, g4, and that is very worrying for white when, you know, black has a pretty solid centre. Niemann thought for 30 minutes and played b4. Knight e7. a4. So Niemann trying to generate play on the queen side. Caruana launches the king side attack. So at the moment it's like a game of chicken. Who's going to back down first? Actually, tough decision. Knight is attacked. Where do you put it? Caruana decided to put it on d8, but I quite like knight a5 as well, because that just halts white's queenside expansion for the moment. So knight d8, I would say, it's a really ambitious move, because this knight is basically heading for the king side. d4. So Niemann, I think, playing in exactly the right way. You know, he's not backing down. He's trying to stir things up in the middle and on the queen side. g4, pushing the knight back, and h5. So this is an extraordinary way for black to play. Caruana just not bothering with the development of these pieces, but going straight on with the attack. Knight a3. Yep, got to develop. Knight e6, there we go. That knight heading for the king side. b6. So Niemann, just trying to stir up play. And, if this is taken, then he gives the knight a square on b5 and attacks c7. And, that's starting to get quite unclear. Therefore, Caruana just plays c6, taking the b5 square away from the knight. And bishop a2, so a calm reaction, just making way for the knight to come to c4, and then it hits those two quite sensitive squares, and also potentially b6 as well. So I think, so far so good for both players. Neither side really backing down, and knight g5. Yep, the knight heading to the king's side. It wants to support this push f3. Knight d3, knight coming up the board. And knight g6, so just supporting the e5 pawn. And yeah, heading over for the king's side. Knight c4, all looks very logical. And now bishop e6. I might come back to some of these moves later, but I want to give you the feel of the game, the flow of the game. Bishop a3. So it really does feel as though the game is already reaching boiling point. There's so much pressure on black's centre. At the moment, the king is sort of safe. There's no open line. Caruana makes a very pragmatic decision now. He decides this knight is just too dangerous. So he exchanges it off. So that takes some pressure off these squares and plays f3. So just carrying straight on with the attack. So there's a threat to take here and open things up with these knights coming in. So g3 and h4. Now this looks really terrifying for white with this h-file opening. But in fact, it's just about okay because the queen can defend along the second rank. So for example, if this is exchanged off, you can see the queen actually protects h2. But it's still very much on the edge for white. And Caruana just plays pawn takes pawn. A very cool move actually. And rook e1 from Niemann. Okay, here is where I think we're going to have our first think and drink moment. So I'll have a drink of my lovely tea. And you have a think, how would you play with black in this position? So far white's defense is holding firm, but black to play. Okay, cheers. Caruana played rook d8. I mean, this is really steady. Not only does it support the centre, it holds the centre, but it's the start of an absolutely deadly manoeuvre. It's brilliant. In fact, there was a move here which looks completely crazy, but wins material. I mean, why on earth would you consider this move when the rook has just moved opposite the king? In fact, I mean, this is such a computer move. I would never consider this, and quite possibly Caruana just brushed it off in his mind. The point is this, that if bishop takes bishop, then pawn takes bishop, and black wins the piece, because two pieces are attacked. Or, if e takes d5, then you can play bishop takes a3. But this is madness. White is a piece down, but, you know, in order to play like this, you'd have to consider pawn takes pawn, knight takes pawn, king is still in the middle. No way would you do this. This is such a computer idea. Rook d8 is far steadier, and it's a very, very strong move. So it's still hard for white to open the position. Niemann is trying with d5. He wants to take here and somehow weaken c6. But okay, here we see the idea of rook d8. It's all about sweeping that rook across to the h file. It's such a direct and crude way of playing, and yet it is highly effective. It's very hard for white to counter this. Watch what happens. Bishop c1. He wants to knock out this knight. Rook h7, doubling on the h file. So this is already looking really dangerous, and it is. Niemann exchanges off the knight. And he's searching for counterplay with queen b3. Well, if white doesn't go on an adventure, well, let's say knight b4 and keeps the queen here. In fact, I mean, white's position is falling apart here. In this case, it's possible just to exchange on h2. And the attack on the second rank is deadly. But, you know, there are going to be other ways to play this position for black. But it just shows you that's the kind of thing that white is facing. So Niemann went on an adventure with the queen, but it's just not good enough. He's seen a little trick here. You still got to maintain your focus in this position. The obvious move is rook takes h2, threatening mate. But in fact, now white is winning. Have a look at this. I mean, this is just one line, but basically black's king gets checked to bits here. Let me show you this finish because it's very cute actually. Check and mate on d8. There are other options for black, but they all end in disaster. Lovely checkmate actually. I do like that. Nice crossfire. So you still got to keep calculating and be precise. Secret of good technique is good calculation. And Caruana found the win. Queen h4. Threatening mate. But also it means that this king can run away. So, well, the game ended like this. Queen b8, king e7. And Niemann resigned. Because if queen c7 check, the king runs to f6. The rook has remained on h7, so f7 is defended. I mean, there's one more check, and then bishop e7 is lights out. So that was the final position. What an absolute crush. In fact, objectively, the position wasn't that bad for white, but I think it shows once again that, you know, when one player takes the initiative very early in the game, it's very hard to think clearly. I think particularly when you play white, when you're the one expecting to take the initiative. If we go back, so clearly this is where the trouble started. This position after black has played f4 with this fantastic pawn wedge. You know, we see it in the King's Indian, for example. In fact, white's position certainly wasn't bad. If we come to this moment, in fact, Niemann has done okay. He played knight d3 here. Turns out this is inaccurate. In fact, it's better just to take on a7, and then let's say knight g6, knight c4, because this knight is coming into b6. Remember in the game, Caruana managed to exchange off that knight. This isn't so clear because after f3, well, one thing is that knight remains on e1 to cover g2. That can be important. And then the knight comes in. In fact, this is very good for white. After knight c4, black's best is to take here. But then, well, compared to the game, you can see that rook certainly doesn't have the possibility to switch to the king side. And this is just very unclear. I mean, the computer thinks this is roughly level, but I mean, anything can happen in this position. But Caruana's attack came through, and yeah, really, just a fantastic win for Fabiano. And that left him in joint first place after 7 rounds. Wesley So won a very nice game, steady game as is his wont, against Andy Woodward. So 2 players sharing the lead, Caruana and So with 5 out of 7, and then Niemann and Aronian on 4 out of 7. Still 4 rounds to go. It's really wide open, and it's turning into a fantastic championship.